Hey, thank you so much, Hillary. It's so cool and surprising that you are also both Hillarys with one L. Amazing. I have a little bit of a cold right now, so I'm going to apologize in advance if I need to pause and mute to blow my nose. Please forgive me. I'm going to try and share my screen. How's that? Are you seeing my slide deck?
Yep, looks great.
Okay, thanks. And I also just want to say before I jump in, thank you all for having me. I've been to some of these meetings before for the purposes of reporting, so it's really an honor to be able to come talk to you. I'm also excited to see Quinn here because I've been reading all of Quinn's reporting. That's so excellent, and I don't think we've actually met face to face yet. So hi, Quinn. It's good to meet you. Good to see you. Okay, so first I'm going to talk just a little bit about my book that Hillary mentioned, and I'll talk a little bit about my reporting, and then I want to leave plenty of time for questions. Um, this book came out in May, and I wrote it because, like most Americans, and probably many of you, I've had my own personal experiences with cancer. In 2011, my younger sister Abby was diagnosed with thyroid cancer when she was 25 years old, which is very young for cancer diagnosis. And thyroid cancer usually runs in families, but no one else in our family had ever had it. No one's had it since. And her doctors mentioned in this kind of like offhanded way at the time that maybe she was exposed to something in the environment that might have increased her cancer risk. Or played a role in the development of her cancer. But when we asked for more information, they kind of didn't have anything to offer. When we went Googling, we also couldn't find much in the way of answers. I'm also an investigative reporter, so I channeled some of those questions into my reporting. And in 2019, I wrote a 5-part series on cancer and environmental exposures in Pittsburgh and Western Pennsylvania. It was titled Prescription for Prevention, and these were some of the headlines from that series. The book actually came directly out of this reporting that I did on the Pittsburgh region. The series won an award, and I got a really nice note from a publisher congratulating me and asking if I'd be interested in expanding these ideas into a book. And then 4 very long years later, this is the book. I'll share just a little more about me. I've been reporting for environmental health news since 2018. Before that, I freelanced and covered a pretty wide range of issues, including the environment and social justice for a whole bunch of news outlets. And I live in Pittsburgh near Regent Square with my partner and our dog Mochi. And I always have to put up a picture of Mochi because she's a star, obviously. I also want to share that my sister is doing great. She made a full recovery. She had her thyroid removed and has been in remission for more than a decade. This is her with her husband and their 2 very cute kids and their dog last Christmas. They live in Pittsburgh too, so I get to see them all the time. And I'm incredibly grateful that she was one of the lucky ones. I'll tell you just a little more about environmental health news for anyone who may not have heard of it. I'm hearing so many like ding dongs, Hillary. Are those?
Sorry about that. It's people coming in.
Okay, no worries. Great. That's fine. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't something happening on my end somehow. Environmental Health News is published by the nonprofit Environmental Health Sciences, and we're a news organization that was founded by a scientist named Pete Myers, who is an expert on endocrine disrupting chemicals. He wrote a book in the 90s, co-wrote a book called Our Stolen Future that was kind of the first exploration of potential multi-generational effects from contaminants like endocrine disrupting chemicals. And our mission is to drive good science into public policy and public discussion on our environment and our health. We're a national publication, and I was our first regional bureau. It's just me here in Pittsburgh, and I'm tasked with covering Pittsburgh and Western Pennsylvania in a way that is hopefully relevant to our national readership. And we just opened a second bureau in the Gulf of Mexico in Texas. specifically focused on the petrochemical development in the Gulf region, and we'll be collaborating on some of that reporting. All of that reporting is happening in both English and Spanish, which is exciting. So these are some of the other stories I've written in the Pittsburgh region. And in all of my reporting, you might be most familiar with this Titans of Plastic one. I came to a couple of these meetings when I was working on this story. And in all of my reporting on environmental health issues, I really try to put the stories of people who are being impacted by pollution or contamination at the center of my reporting. The Titans of Plastic story was about the Shell ethane cracker, and it was a collaboration with Sierra Magazine. So it was on our website and their website and in their print magazine. And I talked with Terry Baumgardner is quoted in this story. I think Bob Schmetzer, maybe a couple other people. And I hope that, you know, when I try to center the stories of the community in that way, I really do my best to make sure that I get those stories right. But you can all hold me accountable for that and let me know. I really tried to do that in my book too. I mentioned that this book has a national focus, but there's a lot of Western Pennsylvania in it. So some of my reporting from that Titans of Plastic story made its way into here. I referenced the ethane cracker kind of throughout and the connection to fracking and fossil fuel extraction. And then I connect all of that to the global plastic pollution crisis and the climate crisis through the lens of the toxic exposures that are kind of inherent to fossil fuel extraction and plastic production. And ultimately, the book is focused on solutions, and it's told through profiles of people who are leading cancer prevention efforts that are focused on reducing our exposure to harmful chemicals in our day-to-day lives. And a couple of these people are from here in Pittsburgh, including Melanie Mead, who's an activist in Clairton, and Barry Breen, who's there on the bottom right. She was diagnosed with breast cancer at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, and she grew up in Oil City. And so I used her story to, first of all, convey, you know, that cancer treatment is difficult and that someone like Barry would certainly have rather had prevention, even though she's very grateful for the life-saving treatment she received, but also to tell the story of the American oil industry, which started in Oil City. And Barry grew up kind of surrounded by refineries there. And with both Barry and Melanie, I really tried, I spent time, so a lot of these interviews had to happen remotely because I was writing this in the kind of thick of the pandemic. But with Melanie and with Barry, as I was writing the book, I met with them in person many times and did lots of interviews over the course of about a year to learn their stories and try to include them in the book, you know, as faithfully as I could. Oh. Okay. Sorry. The discount code was mentioned. Is Hillary, do you have that to drop in the chat?
We do, yes. I believe the code is webinar, and Phoebe will drop that in the chat now.
Perfect, thank you. And I think with that, we can probably open up for questions. Thank you.
I'll ask first. At any point during this process, you know, writing this book, did you uncover any surprises, anything that, you know, really shocked you?
Yeah, there were a number of things that were really surprising when I was working on the book. I think the first is that And actually I learned this when I initially started working on that reporting that was focused on the Pittsburgh region, that since researchers started tracking cancer rates in the 1970s in a kind of uniform way around the world, rates of childhood and early adult cancers have been steadily climbing. So that's true in the United States, and that's also true at the global level. So when you look at a chart of childhood cancer rates over time, and this is true in most countries too, it's just kind of a diagonal line across the page. It's really a little jarring. And I spoke with a really smart epidemiologist and pediatrician named Dr. Phil Landrigan when I was writing that series on pollution and cancer in Pittsburgh. And he said something that was like this light bulb moment for me that made me interested in learning more about this and writing the book, which was that that's way too fast to be the result of genetic changes, that genetic changes happen over centuries and not decades. And that it's also not a matter of just having better diagnostic tests. So sometimes we see increases in diseases because we get better at diagnosing something that's kind of always been happening. But for something like childhood leukemia, which is the most common type of cancer in children, the basic diagnostic test is the same now as it's always been. So it doesn't explain it away either. And he said, one thing that has changed significantly in the last 50 years is the number of manufactured chemicals that we either know raise our cancer risk or that have never been tested for safety that we're all exposed to on a kind of constant ongoing basis. And children are more vulnerable than adults to harmful exposures in their environment. They relative to the size of their bodies, they eat more and they drink more and they breathe more proportionately compared to adults. And then their most complex bodily systems are also still developing. So that development requires a lot of precise events to happen in sequence. So if something comes in that disrupts that sequences, it can cause problems, including raising their risk for diseases like cancer. And it also means that their bodies are less capable of filtering out harmful things that get in than adult bodies are. So he really believes that this rise in childhood cancer rates is kind of the canary in the coal mine when it comes to the overall impact that this new influx of chemical exposures is having on all of us.
Yeah, we have some good data that recently came out on that from the University of Pittsburgh as well, which we'll probably talk about in a moment. I see Nora has her hand up. Nora, go ahead.
Thank you, Hillary. And Kristina, thank you so much for this book. What really interested me in it is that you pulled together all this argument and all of the evidence to give a really good coverage of something that probably a lot of people have been thinking for quite a while. But I really think that that the book is a great just a great step forward in just documenting that you don't have to focus all the time on finding a cure for cancer. You don't have to spend a whole, the quantity of money, for example, going into finding new drugs, new treatments, all of which are, of course, very appreciated by anybody who has to use them. But to spotlight the underlying causes of cancer and the ability then to prevent it in the first place is just such a gift. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you so much, Nora. Yeah, thank you for saying that. It reminded me that another thing that was very surprising to me when I started researching the book was that currently only 7 to 9% of global funds for cancer go toward prevention, and all the rest goes towards treatments and treatments and cures. And treatments and cures are essential. They saved my sister's life. I'm incredibly grateful that we have them and that they're advanced as they are. But I said this about Barry, but my sister would also definitely tell you that if she had a choice, she would have absolutely chosen prevention over treatment. Treatment's really difficult. It's really unpleasant. It leaves people with side effects that can last for the rest of their lives. People have anxiety every time they go in for a follow-up scan, being afraid that their cancer will come back. And one of the reasons that so much funding goes toward prevention and so much funding goes toward treatments and so little goes toward prevention is that there's lots of money to be made by investing in the oncology market. There's I have a screenshot somewhere of this market projection I looked at that is on a website for investors that says advises people to invest in the global oncology market because cancer rates are expected to double in the next 40 years. And that is evidence of strong growth for the market, which is a very kind of grim way of thinking about that. But, unfortunately, nobody stands to make lots of money off of investing in cancer prevention. And so I wanted to make this point in the book that that's not going to emerge naturally from the marketplace or because some brilliant entrepreneur comes along and flips a switch for us. And the only other route to meaningful prevention is through regulations and policies. And so this has to be something that happens through the political levers that we have available to us. I also thought, part of the title of the book came from me thinking, if this was a literal war and that was how our budget looked, that would be like spending, 90%, more than 90% of our budget on treating people who got wounded in this war and less than 10% on trying to stop them from getting hurt in the first place, which just seems obviously like a bad strategy when it comes to how our money should be allocated. I think the other reason it's really hard to advocate for prevention compared to treatment is that when we talk about cancer prevention, it tends to be in really abstract terms, right? It tends to be about data and statistics and long-term trends and cancer rates. And that stuff is really important, but it's hard to connect with emotionally. And if someone is fundraising for better treatments or a cure, then they can put an actual picture of a little girl or a parent who has cancer on the t-shirt and on the Facebook page. And of course, we all feel empathy and we all want to help and do whatever we can to help. But it's the nature of prevention that we don't get to know whose life we saved. We don't get like a hug from someone saying, thank you so much for sparing my family the pain of going through a childhood cancer diagnosis. And so it's part of why there's a lot of data and there are a lot of, the book is really researched and reported, but there are also a lot of stories. I've really tried to center like human stories in the book in an effort to kind of put a face to prevention and make it clear that, these are human stories too. I also found that it's a little overwhelming and depressing when you first start learning about this issue and kind of how lax regulations are here in the United States, which is something I know you're all intimately familiar with. And when I started meeting people who had devoted their lives to this work and to addressing this issue and who had been, in many cases, working on this for decades and having wins that made me safer that I didn't even know about. When I heard their stories, I felt a little less despair and a little more hopeful and optimistic. And so it's a heavy topic, but I think the book is really fundamentally optimistic and hopeful. And I hope that it makes people feel empowered to take action and find ways to get involved.
Thank you. I hope so too. We have a question from Sybil in the chat, and they ask, what is the most common type of cancer in the Pittsburgh area that can possibly be attributed to fracking?
That is a good and big question. So you mentioned that University of Pittsburgh study that just came out. They looked at a couple types of cancer, and it's been a while since I looked at it. Was the only link they found with childhood leukemia? Am I remembering that correctly, or was it lymphoma?
Lymphoma.
It was lymphoma. So they found a link. They found that people who were living close to fracking wells were more likely to develop lymphoma than people who weren't in that study. This is a really tough question when it comes to cancer, because cancer takes a long time, can take a long time to develop. Cancer can take 20 to 30 years to develop. There are really clear links between exposure to benzene and childhood leukemia. That's very clear in the scientific literature, and we know that fracking wells emit some benzene. But again, these studies are tough to conduct, and we haven't even been, fracking hasn't existed for the full span of time, to make up for how long cancer can take to develop. Sometimes parents' exposures can impact their children's risk. But the short answer is we don't have a ton of data on this. There's a really good study that was done by I'm so sorry, you can tell I have a cold, I'm just like slow. That was done by the Cancer and Environment Network of Southwestern Pennsylvania a couple years ago, that looks at which types of cancer are elevated in the Pittsburgh region that have clear links to pollution. And they looked at maybe a 5-county region. So they did look at some fracking counties, and then also Allegheny County and the city. And they said, these are the types of cancer that are elevated above state and national averages for this region. And here are all the links to the scientific literature showing that those cancers are likely increased by pollution. So I can track that down. I know I referenced that study in the book. If folks are interested, I'd be happy to track that down and drop a link in the chat.
Thank you. Looks like Marcia, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Hi, Kristina. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight. Hold on. I certainly intend to purchase your book and read it. It certainly came to our attention, to all of us, that just as Shell was under construction, so did a brand new cancer center in the Beaver Valley Mall that overlooks Shell. A brand new cancer center went up right at the same time. Mm-hmm. My question is, how has the medical community come to you at all? Did they know much about this book?
Yeah, thank you for that. I recently did an interview with the WebMD podcast, and so the host of that podcast is a clinician, and we talked pretty extensively about the fact and the reasons why people who go through medical school get very little formal education in environmental health, unless they kind of pursue it on their own as an additional thing. And she was really like, I'm so eager to know about this because I think about it, and sometimes my patients ask about it, and we really just don't get this in medical school. So I think, and there are some medical associations that are working to change that. That there are a couple that are involved with the Cancer Free Economy Network, including the National Medical Association, where they're really working to try and get this kind of environmental health curricula into medical school, which I hope happens, because I think it's a huge gap in the medical community's knowledge in general.
Absolutely agree. Peter, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I was just wondering, it's something that probably I shouldn't do that much, but when I pump gasoline at the gas station, is there any precaution I can take? I try to stand into the wind. I guess maybe not do it so often, but I try to stand into the wind with the wind blowing away from the gas feeding.
Mm-hmm.
I remember I had a 20 or 30-minute discussion about this 2 or 3 years ago with Doug Shields, and that's the best we could come up with, except don't do it.
Yeah, I don't know that this has been studied. I haven't come across or read anything. I don't know if we have data on the best way to kind of avoid exposures when you're pumping gas. Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know.
Dr.
Yeah.
Lau, go ahead.
Yeah, I just put my 2 cents worth in. That's why when they started doing self-serve and pumping, they've got that big rubber collar. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you've got that rubber collars deep into on your gas's, tank inlet as much as possible. And that's there to prevent the benzene fumes from the gas coming back at you. So don't sort of let the gas thing kind of hang out the side of the gas tank while you're pumping. You want to really make sure you've got it jammed in there in that hood around the exit point.
Thank you. Safety tips with
Thank
Dr.
you.
Lau. We need more of them. Kristina, before we let you go, is there anything you're currently working on or really excited about?
Oh, that's a good question. I wish I was more prepared for it. I'm still doing a lot of press for the book, so I'm doing a lot of podcasts, and it's keeping me busy. I just had an op-ed come out in The Hill about what the federal government could be doing better when it comes to regulating chemicals, specifically with an eye to preventing disease and preventing cancer. And I'm working on, in terms of my reporting, I'm continuing to keep an eye on what's happening at the Shell ethane cracker and report on it. Oh, I'm also working on a story about Pennsylvania's new proposed environmental justice policy. And I had an interview with the Secretary of PADEP, Rich Negrin, recently, which feels significant. They normally, in the past, would only ever answer questions by email, and they offered him up for like a face-to-face Zoom interview. So that is exciting.
No, that's wonderful to hear. And as always, we're happy to help however we can. Thank you so much. We need more eyes on Shell, literally. So thank you for all the great work that you're doing. And if you want to stick around, people have more questions in the chat, you can go ahead and answer that. But thank you for being with us today, Kristina. And we all look forward to using that that promo code. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much.
Of course. And next, I'd like to introduce Quinn. Quinn is a writer and a photographer, and I think we were all just so impressed by his latest work on the Shell Plastics plant right here in Beaver County. Some of the information that he's found has been truly jaw-dropping. So we wanted to have him here today to talk a little bit more about the investigative work. So we'll drop Quinn's bio in the chat and his latest article on Shell, but I will hand it over to Quinn. Quinn, thank you for being here today.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me. Kristina, wonderful to hear about your work as well. Would love to connect sometime in the future. So yeah, I don't know how many of you have read the article, but that's kind of what I'm going to focus on today. I'd like to just kind of start by taking you through like the process of why we started looking into this, the process of obtaining the documents that we obtained, process of putting this all together, and finally kind of what our takeaways were, what we found. So I'm going to share my screen here. I hope it works just to bring up the article. I don't have any slides. Oh. Sorry. 1 second. Are you all seeing this?
Yes, yes, we are.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so, I think I began reporting on the petrochemical plant. Must have been last November. We ran a story that, focused on, among other people, Dr. Lau, the work that he's doing on the rivers with Waterkeeper and all that. And that was kind of our first foray into the area and into the topic of the petrochemical plant. And that had been before the plant even came online. And since we published that, I've been keeping my eyes on the complex, and hearing from folks, hearing concerns, hearing whenever there are flaring events or strange smells going on. And, also through a lot of other reporting, getting the sense that, things are clearly not operating how they are supposed to be operating. So we began this story in, I believe it was, early May, before the consent order agreement was announced. And really our driving question was, what is being, how are these issues being discussed internally, both at the DEP and then between the DEP and Shell. So we filed right to know requests, a number of those for communications between the DEP and Shell. And then we also filed right to know requests for communications between DEP employees. It took us a long time to get those back, probably about 2 months, going back and forth with DEP lawyers and just kind of trying to get a sense of what documents we would be able to obtain. And finally, those came back. I think it was, when did those come back? July 12th, we got those, and the story ran August 8th. So there was about a month in there where, we got back all of these documents, really thousands of documents. And I sat down at my computer and just started cataloging them. And really, what came of that was essentially a timeline. There were a couple key incidents, which I'll go into here in a minute, but, through all that, we kind of got to pull back the curtain and get a sense of, how are these, various incidents, whether that's flaring, whether that's, the glycol or the, spills or smells at the outfall, strange booms from the plant, and of course, citizen complaints as well. How are these being discussed internally, and what are the communications like between the regulators and the corporation? So, that was kind of our process. I'll go through here and just kind of take you through a couple of these events briefly. There's a couple I just wanted to touch on. The first, just as background, there's a lot to get through here, but starting in December 24th, there were a couple of things that I was surprised to find going through these documents and through these communications. And the first was on December 24th, excuse me, when, Shell emailed the DEP, they called the DEP to report a malfunction, and the DEP was unresponsive. There was an email sent from Shell's Kimberly Kale, who is an environmental manager there. Here's a screenshot of that email. And the interesting thing is we also got voicemails through our inquiry. So we actually have, the recording of, discussions between the DEP and Shell. But in this case, this is a situation where Shell was attempting to contact the DEP to report emergency flaring, and the emergency phone line at Shell, or excuse me, at DEP was down. The secondary complaint line was also down, and finally we got the recording of the third voicemail that went to the cell phone of one of the DEP employees. And I don't believe, DEP did not issue a notice of violation, even though, obviously they violated their permits in that instance. And this kind of this timeline really builds out kind of an understanding of, how the DEP is responding to these. So by the end, we kind of had the impression that, DEP has their hands full with this. This is a complex that not only has, been supported by state and federal officials and agencies, but it's also received the largest tax break in Pennsylvania history. So there's a lot riding on this facility. And it's also, massive, of course, as many of you know, and it really presented, new challenges for the DEP in terms of oversight. In this case, on February 13th, this is one of actually the only time that the DEP responded on the ground to a emergency on site. They sent a inspector out, and you can take a look through this, but really the takeaway is that when that inspector arrived, he spoke to Shell employees. He had the incident explained to him, and in his report he notes that Shell is going to continue their investigation into the incident in the morning. And then he left. And later we find some emails on March 30th, which show that Shell's investigation had been completed, and that 7,400 gallons of ethylene glycol had been released, and that a portion of that had made it into the ground. Ethylene glycol, if you don't know, is toxic, can cause a number of health issues, but that was something that was a pretty surprising number to us, and also one that we didn't. It just adds a lot of color to how the DEP is handling these situations, and also just the fact that it took over a month for us to find out that there were 7,400 gallons of ethylene glycol spilled. In some other instances, as many of you might have, citizens are reporting smells, booms. And so we got a little bit of that in the inquiry as well. We got some emails between Shell and DEP, which kind of say, hey, we got this complaint about bad air quality and about some loud booms coming from the plant, but can you address what this might be? What this is this you? And Shell essentially says, no, it's not us. There's nothing that's causing booms, and the air quality is fine. The next DEP inspection was 6 days later, and there was, as far as we can tell, no other follow-up by the agency. And then moving forward, there was the flaring hotspot, which many of you might be familiar with, when they used hoses to keep down the temperatures on one of the flares as it was having somewhat of a meltdown. Then moving forward, of course, one of the bigger things that we found out was the benzene release. We found that they released 219 pounds of benzene in 24 hours, which is, 21 times the reportable quantity governed by CERCLA, and 12 times the EPA action limit. Obviously, benzene is a compound with a lot of concerns, carcinogen, listed as such by the EPA. But this incident also kind of calls into question a permitting decision from the DEP. We found emails from Shell to DEP saying, hey, we need to implement a new type of pollution control to prevent these hydrocarbons from reaching the wastewater treatment plant. And it took the DEP over a month to approve that permit, and longer for Shell to actually put that in place and actually stop the malfunction. So another instance that we uncovered. And the other interesting thing is that the inspections, right, through all of this, through a lot of these odor events that we're seeing happen quite frequently with the benzene and also with some of the flaring, the DEP routine inspections on some of these odor events, which in some cases last multiple weeks, the DEP routine inspections did not mention any malodors during some of those. And as far as we can tell, DEP did not use any type of sampling equipment, optical gas imaging cameras, or any other type of technical or technology to monitor the plant during routine inspections. So that's kind of the gist of it. I won't get too into the details here. You all can take a look at that. There's some interesting details, and really the details are where the interest is with something like this. So I'd advise you all to get in there if that's something you're interested in. But at this point, I'd love to just open it up to questions.
Yeah, I saw PK had some good questions in the chat and they have their hand up. Go ahead.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much. So one of the things we learned with the air quality people is that we finally got their FLIR OGI standard operating procedure, a written document that is actually something in bureaucracy that you have to do in order to maintain compliance. So if you have a bunch of people going out, that if they're doing the same thing and in order to be in compliance with the federal regulations or anything, That's how they stay in compliance. So my suggestion to any person who is asking the DEP, entirely ask them for their standard operating procedure for that. And hold that in your hands prior to them coming to you, or just get it and like watch everything they're doing, right? With that standard operating procedure and make sure that they're in compliance. It's mainly the question that we're having. They're just going out there like ramshot and like, hey, we're sniffing and whatever. I feel like that there's a missing aspect. If they're supposed to be in compliance, there's a standard operating procedure and it's in their things. If they're in their document, so it either is under a right to know if they don't hand it to you, but I would suggest anybody ask for it. Any human being who goes and calls them out, please ask for their standard operating procedure and specifically the document. Like, what number is it? I want to see that document in writing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think Dr. Lau has tried to get his hands on that in the past. And I think during his part, he can update on us if that has been successful or not. Now, Quinn, I'm not sure if you can answer this question. If not, we'll give it to Dr. Lau, but is benzene the main fume producer, or are there other components in gasoline such as octane? Which are the most active, or is that an open question?
I'm not sure as far as gasoline is concerned. I know I wouldn't be surprised.
All right, and then Dr. Lau, we'll let you answer that one on the chat as well. I have a question. After going through this process, and this of course can be your opinion, do you believe that the DEP is doing everything they can to protect Beaver County residents?
You know, the DEP essentially says yes. You know, I think we have seen that, you know, since the consent order, they have started using gas imaging cameras. So that's a positive. We also know that, you know, all of their routine inspections have been completed by a single inspector, except for 3, which were completed by a trainee. So, you know, I think that's a hard question because it's relative, right? It's like how much of their attention relative to all of the other industry in our region is going to the shell cracker plant. I don't have the answer to, but as we all I'm sure know, you know, this is not the only industrial plant. It's certainly unique in its scale and in its recency, but you know, the DEP certainly has their hands full. And yeah, they say that they're going to be doing better since May 24th. I don't know if that's the case, but really we confined our investigation to that 9-month period. And yeah, I can't really weigh in on my opinion on the DEP.
Yeah, and I think Dr. Lau will have an update too on, you know, if they've been in compliance lately. I see Terry has their hand up. Terry, go ahead.
Yes, hi. So it's interesting that Quinn made that comment, because in listening to this, I really thought that I don't know that he would say that he was going to say, well, what do you think the DEP is doing all that it should be doing? I mean, it's just from what he said, it's like they're on industry side and they haven't decided quite how much they're going to be on industry. It just really felt like they were supporting the industry and not the residents. And that's part of our capitalist society, which our previous journalists referred to, why we have all that money going towards cures and not prevention, because it's going to cut into our economics. And those that be government and elsewhere, certainly corporations, they don't want that. So cures are much better. It gives everybody money, but it kills people. I mean, beforehand rather than prevention. And anyway, the whole feeling from his talk was God, the DEP really isn't doing anything. Okay, I mean, when Shell calls and says we have this and the DEP doesn't respond, okay, I could go on, but I won't. Thank you.
Listen, Terry, I'm with you on that. I think that was one of the jaw-dropping moments in Quinn's article. Quinn, do you have anything you're working on currently? We're such a big fan of your work. What's coming out next?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always working on something. Right now I'm waiting for the hydrogen hub announcement to come out. I think that's going to be a really interesting decision, which is going to have a lot of implications for our region in particular, whether that is, new industry or the expansion of old industry. I don't know. I don't think anyone really knows what that's going to look like. So that's something that I'm certainly keeping an eye on. I'm also always keeping an eye on, what's going up at the Shell plant. I think, I'd be really interested to hear from anyone with their experiences, or, I'm always open to a phone call, to a chat. So, yeah.
Great, thank you. And we'll drop Quinn's information in the chat. As always, feel free. He's one of the, people we trust on when someone says, or someone we call on when they say, who do you trust? It's going to be Quinn. So as always, feel free to reach out to Quinn, and it doesn't have to be uncomfortable talking to journalists. It's something that's important. And as you see here, these stories need to be told. And when you find someone who does them in a really great way, keep calling on them. So thank you, Quinn, for your work in Beaver County. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. And we are going to stop our current recording, so that way we can protect everyone's privacy. So don't be alarmed if you see a notice. And right now we're